I think one of the things that I really enjoyed is just like maybe for some context, I'm doing some workshop stuff at work, and one of the things that we focus on is drawing disparate ideas together, and I think that that's something designers do, and that lots of other disciplines try to emulate. You know, it gets referenced when you talk about notable people like Steve Jobs, and there are others that kind of have a lot of experience with different topics for various reasons due to like personal interest or life circumstance, and they're able to draw these things together for some kind of new novel insight, or something that is helpful and meaningful to people. I see a lot of that in Claire. She's referencing all these like books that she's read and like other podcasts she's listened to, and
Mm.
really finding ways to utilize advice from maybe people that like designers wouldn't typically listen to, or like maybe Americans wouldn't typically listen to. I don't know. There's no barriers there, so that's kind of cool and interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I do still want to get like a reading list from Claire. I feel like she was pretty open about how much work she's done on, you know, being open to a variety of perspectives, like sort of keeping your center and your like scope when you're interacting with other people's opinions. But that's not easy. Like it doesn't sound like Claire just has this like innate ability. It sounds like it's something she's explored a lot.
Yeah, it's very purposeful.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this can be a kind of trope, but we are in the arena of like people that are sensitive, right? It's why we are good at our craft, I think. Um, and I think it can be challenging as somebody who like, yeah, is maybe higher on the like empathy spectrum to not get impacted by lots of people's opinions, in a way that like throws off
Mm,
your center.
right.
So I'm really curious about, yeah, like Claire's whole journey of like when she started knowing how much that would impact her, and if it started in design or if it started in the rest of her life and then like fed into her design abilities. I appreciated that she told us, even in the whole balance picture, that design is like not her whole life. I think it's
Yeah,
really healthy when designers can admit that and like,
definitely.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that to your point about how things can affect us emotionally and in what we feel, I was really struck that Claire seems very calm. Not just that she is calm about things, but there's a certain like probably due to her attitude and outlook and perspective that she doesn't have that like what seems like a deep panic. Like sometimes you meet people that are really trying to figure their life out, and it kind of makes you nervous that you're just like sort of worried by proxy because they're unsettled. Maybe that's what it
Mm,
is. And like when you meet someone that's just got their feet on the ground, they can really like take a deep breath and think, and that calm is kind of contagious. And that was a lovely feeling.
that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I know she said she was having existential crises. I'm like, I can't really imagine you having one, but
Right, right, right.
but I believe her. Maybe it's like because she can be so open about that she seems like she still has her feet on the ground.
Yeah, and then, when something bad happens and there's a crisis, that you have that crisis in that moment, but it doesn't attach itself to you and carry through. Like you move on to the next thing in your life and you get resettled. You put your feet back on the ground and you're
Mm,
like, that horrible thing happened back there. You unpack it and then you move on. Like maybe that's part of how that works. I'm not sure.
yeah, yeah, it has the same sort of feeling that our chat with Lindsay did, I think,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just like, I don't know, a real honesty about, you know, what's working, what needs some attention, how to be level-headed about the like flow through. It's cool.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Beyond Ray. I'm here with Kate and Margaret, as usual, in Seattle, and coming from Austin, Texas, we're talking to Claire Duffy today.
Yeah, so I know Claire, this is Kate. I know Claire from the first ever Wood Seattle event we tried to do. She so generously agreed to come and help me before we were even really a chapter and way before we were a podcast. So, Claire, it's really exciting that you're back here with us. Claire's been an industrial designer for over 10 years. When we met, she was based in Seattle, first at Precor, and then later at Peloton after Precor was acquired. She's recently moved to Austin and has joined the design team at Yeti as a senior industrial designer there. Claire, welcome.
Thank you. Super pumped to be here. It's been really cool seeing how this has evolved from your initial event and speaking at that to an entire podcast series. So good on you for sticking with it and growing it into something beautiful that people can listen to forever.
Thanks. So we really love always starting these conversations by asking you to share a little bit about your current role and then the trajectory you've been on recently.
Yeah, of course. So I started off actually having a medical internship at a place called Spine Frontier, which no longer exists because of an audit. I think that didn't go too well. So it
Oh.
was an interesting kind of peek into business in general, but also medical. And what I had liked about medical is the propensity to like help people and create something durable that's doing a lot for both surgeon and person. But after that experience, I got kind of freaked out and went into consulting where you have a totally different look at product design in general. Things tend to be more seasonally focused. Working at Motive, it's a lot of consumer home goods. So I was really excited to work at Precor and moved from Boston to Seattle. And at Precor designs fitness equipment for commercial spaces. So there's a huge emphasis on durability and lasting a long time. The hope, depending on the product, is that it can stay in field for 5 to 10 years, which is a significant amount of time. And Precor is actually really good at considering the full life cycle of a product. And seeing that amount of intentionality and also how businesses can benefit from considering a full life cycle, it was really important to me to continue to build and design durable products with the goal of being in field as long as humanly possible. And an example of when that really served Precor is Precor would take back products that consumers replaced. And during the chip shortage, they were able to remove chips from consoles and use them. And we were to continue certain amounts of production without having to stop everything. And that sort of full consideration of an entire product life cycle really benefited us. And at Yeti, durability and built for the wild is one of the core tenets. Internally, we talk a lot about being built Yeti tough or Yeti durable. And the goal of hard coolers especially is to be able to exist in really wild spaces. You purchase a cooler that's hundreds of dollars so that it can take a beating and last on like 8 to 9 day rafting trips. So it's nice to still be focused on products that are meant to last a long time. I hope to be at Yeti for a while. I just got here. It's only been like 6 months.
Mm.
But thinking about the future, probably NASA. If there's design jobs at NASA, that would be neat and it's not too far. But in terms of that, I feel very lucky for the stars to have aligned in the way that they did.
You want your career at Yeti to be as durable as the products you build.
Yeah, for sure.
It sounds like there's a lot of skills and like things that you collected from job to job or decisions that you made and like values that you carried. Can you talk a little bit about what feels like a through line or what you're bringing to each job? And like, do you kind of say like, here's what I've done there and this is what I want to keep doing and that's how you got hired? Or is it like kind of more values based or a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both. So there are designers who are very technically motivated and love to collect different technical skills. I'm very process motivated and really like to look at how we execute product development from a process perspective when also designing products. So, for example, there are some businesses where the product development process, a designer is handed a brief, and that brief essentially says, please design X, right? And you're given a product to design. Whereas we're trained to develop multiple solutions to problems and to really focus on a problem rather than be handed a solution. So I really appreciate product development environments that give designers the freedom to explore what those possible solutions are to an unmet need in a customer space, or identifying gaps in the market and what that could mean. I think also what's important to me when choosing a place to work is that place is picky about what they put into production, what makes it across the finish line. While interviewing at different companies, some places, almost every project that's kicked off ends up going into production. And at Precor, that was the case somewhat, but it was more because the product development timelines were so long. You had to commit But in other places where the products are smaller and the timelines are smaller, it's easy to just start churning things out. And I think Yeti is almost too good at filtering products and really reflecting on, is this Yeti? Is this a direction we want to take our brand? Almost to a fault, where all functions can show up with an opinion and all opinions are equally valid and nothing is really sacred. And you have to kind of duke it out in different gate reviews. So that's been an interesting shift in how things work in terms of product development. But I think that it's really good. And I really appreciate the intent and the outcome, which is a very vetted final product.
I think that sounds really interesting because, yeah, you're really, really making good products that are very on brand. How does it work for you, like when it happens later in the process? Do you think it would be possible to sort those things out at a company really early and still have it be satisfying? Or do you think that it has to get further along so that the idea is like fleshed out before you can really tell if it needs to get chopped?
I think sometimes it has to do with execution and resourcing. It's important to make sure you're solving the right problem. And sometimes if you're moving fast, that initial problem statement isn't vetted to the degree in which maybe it could be or should be, because you're trying to bring things to market at a consistent cadence to keep shareholders happy, you know? And ironically, though, when you rush certain parts of the process, then you end up slowing down others and sometimes don't get the chance to fully explore different avenues of what product solutions could look like. So I think that it really is situationally dependent. And I think that's something I'm trying to accept more and more in all silos of life, that most things are situationally dependent and are best addressed on a case-by-case basis using information specific to that given thing. So I can't really say definitively yes or no. Probably sometimes.
Sure.
Probably sometimes.
Well, and like you said, you haven't been there long, so maybe over some time there, you can impact that process differently too.
For sure. And I think that as an ID group, something that we're trying to do is advocate for more discovery time and discovery-based exploration to really dig into what those given problems are and develop confidence in our given product solution suggestions or different avenues we could go down. And things change all the time. Like the market changes, what motivates consumers change, people's buying habits change, and especially when we are trying to bring products to market as quickly as possible, but the market's changing every year, it's kind of tough to be flexible and to know what's best. So I think it's just important that we all adapt and accept change being the only constant.
It sounds like you have the ability to do a lot of deep reflection on these decisions, both for projects at work or things in your own life. And do you think that maybe gives you a little bit more clarity or zen about, like, it's okay if this thing falls through, it sort of stops happening for the right reasons? Because I think businesses can hear, oh, we're going to cancel projects, and they get a little panicked. Maybe teams feel a certain anxiety around, like, we just put in all this work and now we can't finish it and bring it across the finish line. Is that a good way to deal with that ambiguity, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great observation about just different approaches and mindsets when it comes to projects. All designers, all people are motivated by different things, right? And I don't consider being an industrial designer a real inherent part of my personality or me as a person. It's something that I do for a job, and it's a job that I really enjoy. But if I didn't do industrial design, I would do something else and find the same amount of happiness. At the end of the day, it's all capitalism, and we're designing products for people to make other people a lot more wealthy than we'll probably ever be. And so when it comes to projects that I invest time on, honestly, it's all about learning. And I think you can have that mindset in anything, to reflect on what you've learned over the course of a project or even a relationship or anything else. If you've learned something, then it was all worth it, because a lot of times those things you learn accumulate into something that really drives important future decisions. So it helps me personally, but we're all different. You know, if someone's just trying to build out their portfolio, which is a totally respectable goal in a position, if you're trying to build out your portfolio, my mindset is not a good one to have, because you're not going to be able.
Don't do it in-house if it's about portfolio, but it's different reasons. I wanted to ask if you still grieve some of the projects that didn't ship, or are you able to move forward?
I have Yeah, I don't really grieve at all, to be honest. Zero. I don't really think about them ever.
Stone cold Claire.
I couldn't be that.
I don't
That's
think
great
about them ever.
attitude.
This is fantastic. You are so like just zen about your approach. Like I feel like you really everything about work is like just about process and output and like learning. And it feels like you're really not stuck on end product or ego elements of it, you know?
What traumatized you that much?
No, that's a good question. Like enough outside of work to where I read the books to make me like
Yeah.
really frame everything in a specific way. But the things that really grind my gears aren't so much design related, it's process related. So when people accept things that aren't working in a given process and just repeat it over and over and over again, product after product, that absolutely kills me.
Definitional insanity.
Yeah, it
True.
makes me so angry. Like I wish I could be sad about it, but it just turns it like, oof, next level, makes me a person that I don't want to be. And I still work to figure out productive ways of expressing the benefits of reevaluating how we do things. And while change can be painful, it is often beneficial. And I think that's why I am more okay with projects dying, as long as we can evaluate and learn, like, why did it die? Can we identify like what it is in the market, what it is with the process? Is it a financial issue? What do we have control over to ensure that whatever we invest this time in is spent bringing a product to market next go around? Because our time is really valuable. So whenever we sink all, like as a team, sink all that time into a product that doesn't go to market, that is bad for everyone, right? And I think that leadership should be a lot more sad about it than I am, because they're the ones that have to do the numbers and the spreadsheets that talk about like how much got sank into it and isn't coming back, presumably.
So speaking of this time investment, you went through a long process basically of leaving Peloton and then having some time off before you started at Yeti. When did you start really thinking about all of the little tools you were collecting or clues as to what mattered to you to like really set yourself up for that next role? It sounds like you were really intentional about it.
I'm glad it sounds that way.
Well, you could tell us how it really was.
Yeah, no. Yeah, honestly, at first, you know, if you don't expect to get laid off, your whole world is a little shook. I was very lucky to have gotten severance because I'd been at Precor slash Peloton at Precor for a while, and Precor was still kind of its own bubble in Peloton. So getting a severance gave me a little cushion to really kind of do what you're doing now, Kate, which is ask like, what am I even doing at all? And should I be doing industrial design? And for a moment, I thought I might throw it all away. Not throw it all away, but not do industrial design.
The capitalism thing is hard though. You're like, oh dang, okay, that really is. I'm part of this machine.
It really kills me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it kills me. But yeah, I started for probably a month. I was digging into whether or not I should go back to school or take classes on maybe nonprofit related things or entrepreneurship. And then I went down this rabbit hole of clothes dumping and recycling, and how there's these huge piles of just clothes that nobody wears, and they're in the open in these underdeveloped countries. I don't know if that's the politically correct term for that anymore, so I apologize if it's not. But yeah, in underdeveloped countries where there isn't really the infrastructure to do anything with it. And I had traveled in Bolivia, like backpacked through Bolivia for a month a couple years ago, and there Bolivia shares a desert called the Acama Desert with Chile, and there's this huge clothes dumping ground where all the clothes are like clean looking because it's in the Andes Mountains and there's not a lot of elements and everything looks totally wearable. And so I started digging into like, what would it take to create some sort of clothes recycling system of businesses by this dumping site that is owned and operated by local people to take all of this clothing from the ground into something usable and sellable, and was like doing all this research about it. And I think part of it was that I'm passionate about it and think it should be an easy problem to solve, you know, intellectually, with maybe a couple $1 million, especially in Chile and Bolivia where the American dollar goes crazy far, right? But then I had been eyeing a Yeti job that was open like a year and a half before. and had been thinking about moving to Austin for a minute because home prices here are way more affordable than in Seattle. So when I saw an open position, all of my very noble clothes recycling dreams kind of fell to the wayside as I applied for that job, amongst many others. And I decided to stick with design for a little while longer. But I'm still thinking about furthering my knowledge in different nonprofit related organizational structure things to learn more about maybe doing something along those lines one day, or looking into like strategic development and understanding more about strategic development and business acumen and figuring out how to further my current career, but also learn more things to maybe pivot in the next, however many decade, who knows.
Side project. It's good to have something very fulfilling in the back of your head that it's like slowly brewing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it was honestly very circumstantial and very lucky. I like kind of like Margaret just said, I've been thinking about, but the opposite. I've been thinking about Yeti in Austin for a while, and it all just kind of happened. In the interview process compared to the other places I interviewed, the way that the design team was looking to build processes and different teams really aligned with how I believe good products are developed. So it was just a really good fit.
Were those things that you knew about Yeti before applying there, or they were all learned during the application and interview process?
They were all learned during the application and interview process. The only thing that I knew about Yeti, which appealed to me at the time, is that like the products are built to last. And I felt that my knowledge of durability at Precor and working alongside engineers to ensure products are manufacturable and durable, and how to work well with cross-functional members to ensure all of those boxes are checked earlier on in the design process. I felt like not knowing where the team was, that I could pick up wherever they were and continue to march forward or to help build whatever team that was needed. It's interesting because it seems at least 6 months ago, in interviews, a lot of companies seem to either be building teams out or actually most of the places I interviewed seem to be building teams out. But looking at how the job market's been, I don't know if people or businesses are building teams out just to cull them in a year. Like, I'm not sure, but it seems like there's the potential to be in roles where you have some influence over processes if you pick the right opportunity, I suppose.
Yeah. I like the background that you knew that already about the company, right? Because it's such a helpful way to be doing like more sustainable design, is like if a designer can be involved that early in the process to know things are going to be made to last or made to recycle or brought back to the company. I guess that's kind of the question I'm asking you about this reflection time. Like when you got into your interviews, did you have a pretty sound list of the types of questions you were trying to dig in about? Like, I want to know where the designer gets to be involved. I want to know how the process flows. Like, do you have advice, I guess, for people in a similar position to really like line up their values with a company and trust it?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what your goals are as an individual, right? So going, back to what we were talking about before, if your goals are to build out your portfolio, you might have a totally different set of priorities, and they might not have anything to do with values at all. I think that also it's tough to gauge in an interview because people don't want to show their cards, really. They don't want to tell you like everything's a mess. We need you to clean some of this up. They want to, yeah. And also worth acknowledging is that many times, even though different processes are a mess or there are opportunities to improve, not all managers want to support that kind of work or those types of efforts. So I think it's important to, more than anything, try and pick questions to ask your manager to gauge what their goals for the team are, what their goals for your position is, and really reflect on if you can fit what you want inside of those goals. So in my Yeti interview, my manager now expressed just the importance of having conviction in designs, also really pressure testing why certain things exist, talking about having data to support different design decisions, listening to customers and our community. So we have core communities, which Yeti's probably really known for, maybe through Yeti Circle. Some people are like obsessed with the brand. But so rodeo, fishing, etc., those are our core communities. And the way we stay engaged with those communities is through our community marketing managers. So really leveraging them to develop opinions. And what was important to him is that designers didn't design in a bubble and were willing to get out there and really learn from everyone internally and externally. So and I that resonated with me. So, you know, why not see what's going on? You don't have to stay anywhere forever unless you sign a contract. So
maybe an interesting topic would be to mention that obviously you didn't apply only to Yeti and you had other options that you considered before making the move, like switching cities. Maybe you want to share something about how to prepare yourself as an industrial designer to this uncertain times when layoffs can come and be because of different business reasons, and how to have this mindset that you don't panic and you don't take the first job that arises, but you can do this work. You can think what's important for you. You can think through the interviewing process and all these questions you want to ask. And you do it in a mindful way that lands you in the better place than you were before.
For sure. So I think it's important to acknowledge that we all have different lifestyles and expectations and savings account balances. So it's important to always acknowledge worst case scenarios throughout life. That for me means having some sort of savings account just in case something bad happens. And this is the most basic, you know, thing anyone can do. Have a savings account. And then on top of that, I guess it's important to apply everywhere because it's good to get the reps in on interviewing and garnering feedback on your work as you're interviewing, especially if you end up unemployed for like 3, 4, 5 months, a year, who knows. Every time you interview and you get that feedback, you have the ability to like implement different things or change the way you tell different product stories and how you navigate some of those conversations. And that's really valuable. And you can take those skills into whatever next job you have as well. So I think not panicking. This is like the pot calling the kettle black a little bit because I had an existential crisis like every couple of days while I was on unemployment. Like, you know, there was one position I was offered that didn't really align. It was actually a remote job, so I could have taken it pretty easily and not had to move. But when you think about your time as a limited resource and it's the only thing you don't get back, you have to acknowledge that whenever you choose to invest that time into this job you're not excited about, it becomes way less likely you're going to find one that you are. And then how long are you willing to stay in that job you're not excited about before ending up in a different position again? I feel that if you are in a place where you can, we're all very lucky we live in a country where we can hopefully get unemployment, I guess, depending on what your given situation is. But if you have some, you can't?
I'm still not on the green card. So if I lose the job, I get the ticket plane back.
Yeah. When Meta was going through some of the layoffs, we were all like very invested in Margaret's experience for that reason.
Yeah, talking about the panicking and existential crises. Yeah, I had like different ideas how to switch from industrial design to like raccoon farming and that type of.
Could you get it if you got another job like a couple days later? Could you finagle it, or do they ship you back no matter what?
No. It's there is like a lot being told about U.S. immigration, but it's not barbaric. But switching a job means switching your visa sponsor. So your work visa needs to be authorized by a different company, which is a new process, new application.
And you have like a window of time to switch it over, basically?
I think so.
Yeah.
Also another part of existential crisis, instead of like reading legal documents, was sitting under the blanket shaking.
Oh, Margaret. Yeah.
But like a lot of people went through similar last year.
Yeah.
So. You said it wasn't barbaric, but that sounds pretty
It's
That's
kind
a
of barbaric. I don't know. We can all
process.
have our opinions on that, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's intense. Yeah, that's a lot of stress for you to have incorporated in a layoff, which is already a stressful process for anybody.
Yeah, so as citizens, we have a certain amount of privilege. You
Yeah.
know, we have a lot less on the line. So, for example, had I been in your shoes, I may have taken whatever first job came along, and that's okay,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think it's all about kind of creating a framework or a plan. So if you take that first job, just set expectations for yourself as to where you put your time if you want to get a different job, or
Mhm.
I don't know. What would you recommend?
What kind of feels like the minimum timeline for to any of you guys where you would work in a job? Like if you took the next one, but you knew you wanted to change again, what do you think is like, you know, doesn't end up being like a hit on your resume because it was so flighty?
Or maybe we should talk about like at which point do you take whichever design job, or at which point it's more beneficial to, let's say, work at Starbucks as bartender and work on your portfolio and develop your skills to get the design job you really want.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely been in the camp of holding off for a job I'm really excited about, but I've been wondering these questions too, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on your personal values. Like, do you want to work a job like that? Like, some people think it's also kind of fun and interesting to do something like be a barista and interact a little more with the public. And some people are too traumatized by food service. I
I
don't know.
loved being a barista. Oh my gosh. I'm afraid I would like it too much if I started again. I'll be like,
I feel like minimum working at a company and it not looking too flaky. With ID, it's pretty, you have this definite benchmark of like, did you launch a product? And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not entirely up to you, but if you launch something, then you can be like, hey, I did it. I proved, I know like kind of the ins and out of this and I'm done. And then you can peace out.
Yeah. Well, plus as designers, I guess we do have the option of like consulting, which is like something that lots of industries don't even have, right? So you can like flex a few months if you can get a job like that, a small role like that.
Could
But
always work on Fiverr, make pennies on the dollar,
Oh, God.
making renderings.
oh man, those websites feel like they take way more than would
You mean
make
you
it
don't want
possible to
gig
survive on
economy
that.
for everything? Everything ever gig economy? Fuck.
So I guess the answer to the employment break is you either go to the very fancy, well-recognized place that looks good on the resume, even if you just make sketches or you make coffee there and you don't launch anything, or you go to like some unknown garage brand.
I mean, Claire, do you want to share any of your existential crisis moments, or does it feel too private? Because I'm curious what you were grappling with.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I have a question for you guys real quick. Like you're talking as you're weighing these possibilities, you guys are talking about whether or not you're launching something. Does launching things mean a lot to you?
Not personally, but I do think that it's like if you leave a company with nothing to put in a portfolio, even if you're fairly happy with your portfolio, that does feel like professionally a loss of time that is going to be harder to take advantage of. You know what I mean? Like at least if you put out one product you were happy with, it like, you
I
know.
think it's a shortcut in communicating to someone else. Like it's easier to tell someone, a recruiter or a design manager, whoever is interviewing you, about a period of time if there's an artifact at the end of it, if there's a certain, like, you can spin a story, I guess, like, this is my complete part of this project, never mind that it's still in progress and hasn't launched yet, and you just have to work a little harder at kind of tying a bow on something. But if something's out on the market, you can just be like, there it is in Target, even if you hate it. It's just about the ease, maybe, and that you have to do a little less spin. I mean, you're always going to probably have to do a bit of spin, right? So,
I mean, I keep going back and visiting the company I quit as the final prototypes, as the final pieces of the things that I designed get to the office. Like my friends there who are the project managers start texting me. They're like, okay, like, your backpack is here now. And I go in and I like take my own photos of it because I didn't end up wanting to stay long enough to see those across the finish line. And I also like, am proud of the work or do want to use the work to keep on moving on, So I think it's relevant.
that's close enough to done, though. Like,
Yeah, it's pretty done. I mean,
I think it's maybe good to note as well that a product doesn't necessarily have to launch for you to put it in your portfolio. You just
right.
have to be willing to have what could be an uncomfortable conversation with your manager before you're in that position about what am I allowed to show? What
Right.
am I not allowed to show? What can I change to where I can show it? what are the criteria for who I can and can't show things to.
Right.
I know that and I definitely recommend having that conversation with your manager rather than an HR representative, just because managers, if they're human, they understand that there are certain expectations of industrial designers in interviews. So I think many of them are merciful, and before you're put in that position, you can come up with some sort of criteria or general understanding of what would be acceptable to where you won't get sued. A lot of times it just means don't put it on the internet, or don't print it out, or have it password protected and redact like logos and things like that. But yeah, so I think that's maybe something good to note, that anything is possible. You just have to,
There is one more angle to it, because sure, you don't want to have conversation with your HR, but you also don't want to be asked mid-through interview, how come you're showing this to us? Because you also interview with designers who know the reality, and they can easily wait in their experience and be like, hey, it's not launched, but it looks pretty finished, and I see logo here, but I don't see like any mention about that. So if you had the conversation before at your company, you can not stress about it. You can be very open. You can be prepared to have this conversation during interview, and it also shows your, moral values. Not being someone who like takes the work and run off with it to get a better job.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, I think it's all situationally dependent.
Yeah, and I've been in this situation, and it was the least company I wanted to have this conversation. It was tough.
Uh-oh.
you can learn more than that.
I learned.
Because you're saying you did run off with work that you kind of felt like you had to be secretive about?
It's something like I knew that I don't have to be secretive about, because I already knew that it will not launch. But to make myself look better in the interview, I was kind of presenting it from the angle that I'm making work on it to be launched, to like make it more significant and like more experience involved. So it was very shady line for both the parties. My previous job and the job I was applying for.
Gotcha.
Didn't get it. It actually threw me off. And I knew how to have those hard conversations later, and it definitely paid off.
Yeah. I mean, I think that morals and sort of like how you show up is one of the only things you get to totally be in charge of as you go through a process like this, right? So yeah, definitely not putting things out in the world that you like have to be secretive about, or like, I feel like this was a thing maybe even just in college where people were trying to get internships and there were so many group projects, and it was like some shadiness about like certain people like making it seem like group projects or not, or making it seem like their work in that element or not. I think when you're in a professional level that fades away a little bit, or at least I've never experienced it on a professional level, but it's definitely interesting because I feel like it's pretty obvious too. Like Ginger, you look at so many intern portfolios. Do you feel like you can spot decisions like that? Yeah.
100%. If I'm talking to someone, I'm just like, and they're not clear about who they worked with, I just ask them, was this a group project? And then they're like, oh yeah. Okay, well, what part did you do?
Yeah. And you're like, these sketches look different than all your other sketches.
Yeah, people arguing about sketches. I remember in college, and we had like a bit of the automotive, and people were so obsessed that someone would steal their sketch and they were putting their signatures like all over it. And I'm like, yeah, for sure. If like for a job, someone will be checking signatures on the like sketch page.
Oh my God. That's funny.
I think the professional equivalent is when you get portfolios from people who are coming from consulting firms, because at least at the consultancy I work at, there was a very integrated system where you didn't have total ownership of a project. A lot of times you had a very defined part, but at the end, those renderings and everything about it, regardless of what your part was, is the, it's out there. So there's been instances where going through portfolios, that's something that I'm cognizant of. It's kind of funny because someone who works at a place that I had worked at some point applied to a job at Yeti, and the one bit of input that I gave to the person like interviewing them was to ask about what their specific contribution was, because we can't be sure that it was significant from what they had presented. So yeah, I think that that's, especially if you're in a place to hire, right? I think we're all getting a little longer in the tooth in terms of our design careers, and the more we interface with potential hires, it is something to be cognizant of.
Yeah. And that's not to say, because I want to add in, I have had a conversation in this portfolio process with another industrial designer I really respect. And she is like very much of the opinion that if you were involved in the project, you should still put it in. She's like, there's so many men out there that are just like throwing every single thing they've ever even like blinked at into their portfolio, that it's like, if you were part of the concepting stage and like you did do an element of it, to not feel like you have to like never put in work that had other people touch it, right? It's just about honesty about which parts are yours. So I don't want to discourage any younger designers from being like shoot themselves in the foot by not including important projects,
1,000%.
Yeah.
Just don't lie.
Just don't lie. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like how much in the weeds we got in.
Also, don't be misleading.
Yeah, don't kind of lie by omission either, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's ultimately a process that makes your portfolio and your presentation of it actually stronger, where you have to think about, what did I do? Do I believe in that? Do I, like what I did? And then I can convey that to someone, like, this was the value of what I did and why I did it. That's the kind of work that you put into your portfolio that actually gets you a job. If you just like put stuff in it because you think it looks like hot sketches or it's like a sexy product or because it got launched, that's pretty superficial stuff.
I think more valuable than having a sexy product that's exactly what you wanted is being able to identify parts of your design that didn't end up the way that you had envisioned and talk about how you got there as a development team and why it was important to move forward with that change, even if it's, a screw in the middle of a beautiful surface. It's serving a very real purpose, and that shows that you're able to compromise as a designer and able to prioritize like a hierarchy of needs depending on, and what that is depends on every company, right? There are some brands where a screw in the middle of a surface would be terrible, and then other products where it's less terrible. So yeah, I think it's important to talk about things that don't go exactly the way you'd hoped or planned and understand what you learned.
You practice merciful design. Screw boss in the middle of the surface is okay. It's merciful. You let the mechanical engineer go home and sleep.
Oh. You're not like
you filleted it like this so that it wouldn't reflect so much light, like talk about how you made the boil a little less noticeable.
Claire, there's like another area I wanted to talk to you about that is relevant to the conversation actually, but it is, you were interviewed as part of that Sprout Studios book, which is Women in ID. I wanted to know from that interview more about how you gained the confidence to advocate for your role, advocate maybe for women in design, the biases that you had started to see. And I also just want to know about the process to be part of that project, how they approached you and why you decided to do it.
Yeah, so how I gained confidence to advocate for myself. I think when you're pushed to a certain point of desperation and you read all the books and you try all the things, you really start to ask bigger questions about how much of this is a me problem, how much of this could be a systems problem, how much of this could be a leadership problem. And it's important to eventually acknowledge the soup of nuance that goes into any given professional issue. I like to lead with accountability personally and take as much responsibility as I can for everything. I made the mistake as a younger designer of assuming everyone holds themselves accountable and that and wasn't really able to distinguish between people who are interested in advocating for their team and people who are mostly prioritizing business need. And I think that it's important in a leadership role to be able to balance both. I personally always appreciate transparency. So for example, something I've come to realize is that often when we are working towards promotions and or leveling up or any sort of transition, the business at large has to be in a place to support it. Things can't happen just because you deserve it. And I think that realizing that was a huge aha moment for me. And I'm sad that it happened so late in my career, because I think it would have prevented me from internalizing a lot of instances where I maybe wasn't given a promotion or there wasn't a clear path illustrated to my progression as an employee, right? And I think I was operating under the assumption that maybe other people had that. I think depending on the company you're at, design team sizes can really vary a lot. Right now, I'm on the largest design team I've ever been part of, and it's great. You can listen to different people's histories within the company and understand the context around their advancement, right? And it creates a more equitable space for everyone for that to be an open conversation. Whereas if you're on a smaller design team, there seems to be a little bit more competition because there's limited space for advancement, and there might not be anyone who is your equal, like in a different category, for example. So it becomes more difficult to gauge why things are happening, and you have to really lean on management to illustrate exactly all of the forces at play around your advancement. And not all managers are, proficient at managing, and there are different types of employees. Some people lean into being a leader and exemplifying leadership, even though they might not be in a senior leadership role, right? Middle management, or even us as individual contributors, we can exemplify good leadership qualities and work to advocate for ourselves and others. But other people aren't really interested in growing in that direction. I don't have a family. I don't have some of these other things that people are balancing. So I get to go home and read books and do other things. They might just be trying to get through the day. And I think those are the kind of things that I've learned it's important to suss out in interviews, like who you report directly to, like what are their motivations as a leader and as a people manager, to assess the level of growth you might have in that role. And that can play a lot into how much time you intend to spend at that given company, to kind of loop this back to what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. If you take a position intending for it to be temporary, you get a good understanding of what temporary looks like. And then the second question was,
well, these are all in the vein of the Sprout interview. I think we have a lot of questions about that conversation because you said some things that were really motivating to me. But maybe you could set the scene a little bit to give context to what that project was in general, like why you were part of this series of interviews of women in ID.
Yeah, of course. So when I was a young Padawan at Massachusetts College of Art and Design, I went to a bunch of Third Thursday events, which is like design events where everyone's just kind of drinking and talking about design and learning about what life looks like after college and exploring where design can take us. And I crossed paths with Jordan Nolman, who is now the CEO of Sprout. And I actually am pretty familiar with at least maybe 25% now, because they've grown quite a bit in the last few years. But a good number of their employees were either former Mass Art grads who I was classmates with, or I've worked with them in some capacity within the Boston design scene. So I think that it's interesting because I don't know exactly what it was. I feel very privileged and had a little bit of imposter syndrome when Sprout asked me to be involved, because of the other women who were in that book were women that I looked up to, like in college. So it was wild to be included. I think part of it has to do, outside of just them wanting to pull from a diverse range of experience levels, how long you're in design for. Looking at the people I graduated with, not everyone still works in industrial design, and people work in industrial design in different capacities. I think having held several positions after college maybe gave me a little bit more of a wider lens to draw from in terms of experiences. But yeah, I had crossed paths. Oh, Matthew Evans, I don't know what his title is exactly at Sprout, but we actually talked often about equitable practices and different social justice causes, and trying to navigate some of these subjects at the most surface level you can in a business situation. While we were at Motive together at the time, the Occupy movement was happening. And so that creates kind of less than awesome conversations sometimes in different spaces. And I think that he knows making an equitable workplace was always something that I cared about. And on my way out of Motive, I made a little bit of a stink about our lack of maternity leave policy. So, even though I wasn't like pregnant or anything, like it's just whenever you have the chance to advocate for something, even if it doesn't pertain to you, I believe in doing that, because so many people don't. And if you don't, then who's going to?
Mhm.
So I think it's just, yeah, probably me being pretty loud about certain things, and much younger when exposed to when having cross paths with those people, and them just trusting that I've grown up a little bit when they asked to interview me.
That sounds like a really valid reason to be in that book.
Kind of related to what you said earlier about putting in the time to read some books and get some perspective about what is it about my own mindset or position in a certain environment that is or isn't changeable, like what's sort of like not my fault versus what's something that, like when you see inequities in the workplace or in design, that is something that's like you can't just let it go, you have to sort of push against it. What's your process of like discovering the things that were sort of freeing, like, no, that's actually not something that I have control over, or like understanding it's a product of circumstance versus like, no, this is a circumstance or a system that exists now, but we should try to change it. And, you know, even if it's kind of like hard or puts you in a difficult position, like making a stink on your way out of a workplace.
Yeah, I think you have to ask yourself, what do you have to lose? And if you have something to lose, you should do it a little bit more gracefully than I probably have in the past. I think my approach is different now, where in a previous life, I would push against it and make a lot of statements and think about what we should be doing. And my mindset around basically how to approach everything has changed completely. I don't, as a inside and outside of social justice and equity and things like that, I try not to focus on should, like what should we be doing, and instead try to lead with curiosity and ask questions that help people reflect on why they're choosing something, to better understand what their thought process is. So maybe you could compare it to when you're presented with a solution in, you know, a product development space, figuring out how to ask, why is this the solution?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and find the original problem, I guess. So for example, there was a time when it was important to me that a requirement be, when designing a product, that anyone could use it with one hand rather than have to use two hands. Because like, why wouldn't you, honestly? But that was not the universal thought. And there is a portion that has of, you know, my thinking that has to do with well, not everyone always has two hands. Not only do some people not have a second functioning hand, but there are people, you might just have something in your hand. You know, there's a million reasons to design something that uses one hand, but as sometimes heated design oriented conversations often do, it can get boiled down into people making a lot of assumptions. And so rather than continuing to argue for something, it's important to dig into where is that assumption originating,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in that circumstance, the assumption was that it's kind of, I shouldn't laugh, but it just blew my mind a little bit. So like someone said that people who only have one hand have learned how to adapt and do things with their one hand, even if it requires two hands. And there might be some truth to that to an extent, right? I can't really confirm or deny as someone with two hands. So I asked them, have you looked into that? Like, can you tell me a story about when someone may have adapted in that way? And nothing came to mind. And so, you know, we had a conversation about how to find out information about spaces in which one might be doing that. What are people's preferences who do have alternative disabilities? How do we investigate what people's preferences are? Because they agreed that we shouldn't assume as able-bodied people, right? So we talked about, okay, if we're not going to assume, what does educating ourselves look like? And so that's a much more productive conversation and like journey to go on together than to push with statements. And that's something I continue to work on. It's a journey.
That sounds really effective. I feel like the should that's hard to avoid there is like, we should care about this, right? Like even just the baseline of like doing the research matters. How do you deal with it if you run into an attitude that's just sort of like, why do we need to care about all these other like perspectives or needs or something that's not like our core goal?
What I've come to kind of assume, or the benefit of the doubt that I give people, is just that we all have a finite amount of energy. And I'm just trusting that they're spending the energy it would require to Google, that they're just spending it on something else that really matters to them, and you have to make a valid argument for expending that energy on caring about something else, right? Because I don't know what's going on in their lives, and it's exhausting to have to continually make arguments for things that to you feel inherent as part of your job. But I think the more we grow within our positions, the more we have to do that, to be honest. The more we're in positions where we can negotiate changes in approach, changes in mindset, and really advocate for looking at problems a little differently. And so it's something to be grateful for, as exhausting as it is.
I can't believe I'm doing all this hard work just to sign up for more hard work.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's honestly what it comes down to, and why what feels like the right thing to do to you, to someone else, just feels like complicating something that should be simple. And I understand, I don't agree, but I understand.
I think one of the things we wanted to ask about, it's nice to get this is like the flip side, boots on the ground, changing minds, combating inequities and like poor systems. You also co-chaired the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging Council at Precor. And so like, do you think you were doing this work in that council, or like how is that a little different than maybe a very like day-to-day version like what you just described?
I'm having to dig back in time. That was like,
it's like the before times,
right? When we all, yeah, it was the right after before times, because
right,
I'm pretty sure, yeah, it was right after the before times. So our memories had been wiped. But yeah, so that effort started as a result of a lot of the awareness that I think we were all, like, as a nation, learning about different inequities that exist within all different systems throughout the United States. And I think the creation of that DEEBS team was in response to that. And I have to really applaud Precor for trying. My personal opinion is that that position should be its own position and a compensated one. And there are people who study this professionally and know how to implement these things within a business setting in a way that's sustainable and scalable. And I don't think any of us on that team had that experience in order to do that. But in the context of doing what you can, that team was sectioned off in order to have any impact, essentially, that we could. For example, there was an initiative to refurbish laptops to give to kids who don't have access to different technology for school, etc. So some good things happened. The thing that's hard to weigh is looking through a corporate lens, like, what impact is that having? So there was a decent community impact, but is that the goal? Or then I wonder, is it just like a marketing or like a business line, And I think that, honestly, sometimes when things have a label, people are a lot less not in a place to listen so much. Whereas if you show up with a certain mindset and approach on a daily basis, you can wear people down, like with acceptance or, acknowledging alternate pronouns, like all of these things. If you habitually show up trying to advocate for people in all different, environments, I think that ends up having a much more impactful result, honestly, than being part of a corporate system. I think that one thing I'm learning more and more is that a business needs, like, the infrastructure in order to implement meaningful change at a corporate level. And I think that I really appreciate what Precor was trying to do. Like, we all were trying, but I think that if a business has the finances to support diversity and inclusion discipline, that it should be a paid position. I think Precor never had the finances for much until bought by Peloton. And Peloton actually did have a very built out diversity inclusion. I forget exactly which of the letters that the team had, but theirs was very developed, and Peloton did a really great job of focusing on inclusion and diversity in their messaging and acknowledging people from all different backgrounds and alternative everything. Peloton does a really good job of that. I'm not sure what they're doing now, but they did when I was there. A lot can change.
That's some nice perspective to have on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I feel like that was a really open share at the end. And so I feel a little sad that this is the end of our conversation. But I do think that we we'll wrap up since we're close to the end of our time with you. There's 2 questions that we generally like to ask. One is kind of silly and lighthearted, and it's Margaret's specialty.
After the conversation about disability, equality, advocating for the others, it will sound very silly if I ask you what's your favorite color, but you might be the last guest we ever ask this.
We've been doing it for a year, or since we started. Yeah, this like question that started and then has just become kind of like a funny staple. So,
Are you going to pick a different question in the future? What's
Mhm.
happening to the question?
Are you disappointed?
Yeah,
You like the color question?
I do like the color question.
It tells a lot about person.
I like the way people answer it. I think that the way people answer it has generally been like, I don't know, it has had more thought behind it than I think I necessarily would have if I was answering it. So that part's been cool. Yeah, we'll see. It's been one of our changes though. We're talking about things to update this year now in the show, and we were thinking we might swap it out for another lighthearted question.
I like that it makes you think of childhood for a minute,
Oh, that's nice.
right? It like brings you back a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my favorite color is pink.
No.
Was that
Yeah.
big in your childhood?
No.
Oh,
I've only recently, I think since I've become a designer, I've really liked salmon like as a color, but now I just kind of like lighter pink, and I could have like a super big explanation that means a lot, but I think that like I kind of like pink because I came into like really appreciating being a woman and what makes like women, and pink is always associated with women. So I kind of like that. I think the older I get, the more I just prefer women in general, like
For all
in all
things.
things. Yeah.
Though you're
My
dating a
partner's-
man.
Yeah, my partner's a man, but just like even so I do jujitsu, and I went to a women's open mat. So everyone's sweating on each other and it's disgusting. And at the end of this women's open mat, we were all like, you know what? We all smell pretty good. Like no one in here stinks. It actually smells good in here still. And anytime you go to any open mat with men, it smells like absolute just rotten garbage 10 minutes into the open mat. You know, it's disgusting. And there's
Guys
like
are
hair everywhere.
gross.
They're disgusting. But at the end of like an hour and a half of women all sweating on each other, it still smelled good. So after that, I was just like, yeah.
That's what sealed the deal for you on femininity. You're
Yeah.
like, I'm good, I'm in it.
Yeah. But also I like pink just because it's like a tint of red, and red is like its own, some people say red is a neutral color. So I kind of like that it's part of a neutral color, but it's not at the same time. I don't know. Cool.
Huh.
Have you ever heard that red is like its own sort of neutral color?
No,
In what context? Like
it's
neutral?
new information.
So in the context of if you're trying to think of a color to make a product that's safe,
Yeah.
that isn't black, gray, brown, beige, red
Yes.
is safe.
In the land of baseball boys, red and blue have been my entire experience for the last several years. So I agree with that wholeheartedly. If you want it to be like loud and vibrant.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, what are y'all's like 5-year career goals? Where are you taking your career?
Oh, Jesus.
it's a tough question. I've kind of got asked this the other day, and honestly, I don't have a very cohesive outline. That's my like shameful admission. The plan, I feel like if you asked me 5 years ago, I probably would have described like something kind of like this, that I'm involved in the community, that like I'm moving up at work and like things are going really good. And so like I haven't made another step. Like when you arrive somewhere, suddenly you have to like do this all over again. Man, that is rough. So I haven't.
But
If
also,
anyone
it's
has
such an accomplishment that you've
suggestions,
done what you
yeah,
wanted.
open to suggestions.
You can
All right.
brain dump too, and it's allowed to change every day. No one's
That's
holding
true.
you to it. This podcast just lasts forever on the internet. No big deal.
I feel like I'm agree with Ginger that some of mine are pretty correlated with what I want next. So I would assume that they'll keep growing. But I really want to learn a new skill. Like I really do want to get good at soft goods. It's like new area of design that I feel like I could only learn inside of a company. And it's already like on that journey, but want to get professionally good at it. I'd really love to experience being on like a big team of designers and seeing what it's like to just have like, I don't know, a lot more design thought around me, because I feel like I've dipped my toe now for a while into what it's like to be on a really small design team working with business and engineering predominantly. And yeah, building this community bigger would be really cool. And I think doing more mentorship. I really, really love the experiences I've had anytime I was able to like TA in college, or have been able to go back to college portfolio reviews and things like that. So I think that being involved with younger designers in a more substantial, consistent way would be really satisfying.
I want to do what I'm doing, but without mistakes.
Well, good luck with that.
It's a good endeavor. Like, just do what you're doing, but even better.
Mistakes are a mindset, okay? It's all
Yeah,
you can't.
Claire has become our master of like, it's a learning moment. It's always a learning moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of enlightenment going on in this episode.
Yeah.
I feel really zen right now.
I appreciate it. And I think maybe it's like, it's a good balance that starts to come, like you're saying too, of like, I do care a lot about design, but my 5-year goals, they're like, the career ones are so dependent on the life ones, or like the location-based ones, or the other things I want to like explore or learn, right? And I think that that's as it should be. So,
Do you have
yeah.
location goals?
Well, this is kind of in the weeds, I think, but I just associate this next job with determining like where I'm going to spend the next several years of my life, and it feels like a big deal. And I'm really open to that flexibility at the moment, but then I think that after that change, I want to start building some pretty substantial things in whatever place I go. So, or stay. I do like it here.
It's pretty cool here.
Yeah.
Get out of there.
We'll see. Beyond Ray might become a multi-location based show.
I think that I totally get what you're saying. I also want to challenge you to become okay with maybe staying in place 1 or 2 years, because it's not that long. And I think I just feel the opposite of most people, where moving is exciting. And there is this scientific study that I listened to, which is like, there are a couple times where people will feel they had a really good year, right? There's a couple ways to have a really good year. And one of the ways, like getting a new job, moving, and like a handful of other things, are like express ways to have a really good year. So a lot of times just like a lot of change with a good attitude will get you by for at least a year if you start to feel stagnant.
Yeah, I've moved a couple times and they've been like fantastic decisions. So I'm open to it. Just my sister's gonna wring my neck because she just got here.
Oh.
But no, it'll be great. She's supportive. Okay, to get into our last question, it is something we always want to ask our guests. Maybe you're familiar with it already, but we really, really want to celebrate you. And so we would like you to reflect on and share with us, like, what is the one really special, unique thing that you bring to the table?
In a professional setting?
I think it's both. You can answer either way.
I think I have become good at understanding how relative many things are. So something that happens, which is bad or a mistake, could be not bad relative to something worse. And just understanding, putting some, I don't know, a framework to see things a little bit more realistically. And to me, realistically means nothing really matters. At the end of the day, none of it really matters. We don't have control over very many things, but we do have control over how we respond in any given situation. So I think that having that mindset makes me a little bit unique, because on most days, not every day, but on most days, I can hear things or interpret things with certain amounts of balance and understanding, or know when to take time and reflect on something before really developing an opinion, whether that be professionally or personally. I think giving yourself time to process is really good, a good practice. I think it's great that you're doing it, Kate.
Thanks.
And I think more people should spend that time alone, not scrolling TikTok. I actually was listening to this, I can't pronounce this man's name, but I was listening to this podcast. It's a Diary of a CEO podcast or something. I'd never really listened to it before, but the author of Sapiens and this other book, Homo Deus.
Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah.
Right?
How do you say his name?
Yeah, gosh, it's Yuval Harari, but I think there's another name in there. We can look it up.
Yeah. So I was listening. You should listen to this interview. It's super interesting, just hearing his perspective on where he thinks humanity is going. But
oh yeah, Yuval Noah Harari.
Okay, that one for sure. But he takes meditation retreats that last from 30 to 60 days at a time. And he doesn't bring books. He doesn't bring anything. And he says that's what it takes for him to recenter himself and write these really monumental books that he writes.
Yeah.
And so I think it just speaks to the importance of slowing down and resting
Yeah,
to really recalibrate. But yeah, we should all do it more sleep.
exciting. I feel like in our show notes we should include a book list rec from Claire about how you got so wise lately.
Just read the Tao of Physics. I read the Tao of Physics and my life changed. It's like a really dense novel that's mostly science, but it's really good. It talks a lot about how Eastern religions kind of mirror quantum physics and different principles in Eastern religions, and yeah, how it's reflected in nature and everyday life. So it is really interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, I challenge you not to fall asleep at least like 10 times throughout the day. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me on this podcast. It's been so great chatting and connecting with you guys and building this network more.
Yeah, thank you again, because like I said at the beginning, you were here for like the very first thing we ever tried to do, and it's so good to have you back now that we have become something established. Do you want to share any way that people could follow your work or get in touch?
Yeah, for sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. I honestly don't have a big social media following. My Instagram is mostly cat right now. So Kate, you can confirm this.
It's very cute, yeah.
But yeah, I think LinkedIn is the way to go. My name is just Clare Duffy, and you can find me probably through Yeti. All right, have a great night, everyone.
See you,
Have a good
Claire.
rest of your evening.
Bye.